Honestly, after watching the opening moments of this story, I felt a chill at how perfectly deceptive the wife appears to be. To me, this isn't just a case of infidelity. It feels like a calculated betrayal where someone plays the role of a loving spouse while quietly destroying everything from within. What I personally find unacceptable is how systematically she deceives her husband, even plotting with her lover to take control of his assets. That level of cold, intentional manipulation is something I find extremely difficult to justify. And if you still believe kindness always leads to loyalty, this story will feel like a harsh wake-up call. Let's see how a silent husband turns a family gathering into a courtroom of truth, exposing the betrayal in front of everyone.
Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Emily met Oliver during her second-to-last semester of college, in an elective class she almost didn't take. She signed up at the last minute without high hopes, but quickly found herself drawn into the discussions, always sitting in the same row. That's where he showed up, starting a conversation about the group project, then about an article, then about the cafe near campus. It wasn't long before their contact became routine. He'd text her between classes, offer help with assignments, remind her of deadlines she'd forgotten. Before long, they were sharing secrets in the parking lot, splitting dessert at the corner diner, and bumping into each other on purpose in the hallways. The connection grew slowly, without rush, but with an intensity she'd never felt before. After a few months, they started dating. Their relationship had something rare, ease. Everything flowed without tension. Oliver was helpful, but never over the top. He had a sense of humor, but knew when to listen. He showed real interest in what she said, even when the topic seemed trivial. Emily felt respected in every little way. He remembered important dates without phone reminders, made a point of including her in future plans, and had a natural way of handling everyday tasks, sharing responsibilities without her having to ask. There was a quiet partnership built on small, consistent gestures. When she got sick during finals week, he brought her soup, picked up medicine, turned in her assignments on time, and even organized her files by folder. Not because he had to. Because he cared. After graduation, they decided to rent an apartment together. Emily was nervous at first, any big change would have made her hesitate, but she was convinced by everything they'd already been through. And during the first few months in the new place, every morning felt like a celebration. They'd have coffee together, split bills, talk about the neighbors, go grocery shopping on Saturdays. Oliver left sweet notes stuck to the bathroom mirror or tucked into the pages of her books. Sometimes, he'd make her favorite meal when she came home tired from work, without making a big deal about it. He listened with genuine attention, even when she just needed to vent without asking for solutions. He gave her shoulder massages without her having to complain about pain. He'd hold her hand on the couch while watching TV, as if that simple touch was enough to make him feel at peace. Emily felt safe. She didn't have to pretend to be strong all the time or hide her vulnerabilities. He knew her on good days and on hard ones. And he stayed. One Saturday, while sorting through a box of old photos, she admitted she'd never felt so at ease in a relationship. Oliver didn't give a speech. He just smiled and said it was nice to hear. Moments like that filled her heart with certainty. Their relationship felt mature, solid, built on real foundations, not fleeting illusions. Emily's closest friends noticed the change in her too. She seemed lighter, more confident, less anxious about the future. Some even joked that she'd finally found her balance. Her sister once said it was beautiful to see her with someone who added to her life instead of demanding or competing with her. Emily's work also reflected this emotional stability. She performed better, got more involved in projects, and could actually relax on weekends. The feeling of having a home, not just a house, became part of her daily life. Of course, there were disagreements. Like any couple, they had different opinions on certain things, and sometimes their preferences clashed. But both knew how to talk. They didn't fight to be right. They worked to resolve things before they turned into walls. That strengthened their trust. Oliver never avoided conversations. Emily, even when afraid of seeming dramatic, said what she felt. And he listened. This kind of exchange made her feel genuinely loved, desired, and respected for a year and a half. To her, the relationship was exactly what she'd always wanted: calm love, daily presence, true partnership. Nothing about it required extreme sacrifices or hidden strategies. She believed she'd found what so many people spend years searching for. And for a long time, she was sure nothing could shake what they'd built together. It was during a casual moment of curiosity that Emily started watching relationship videos on YouTube and Instagram. The algorithms fed her content about feminine strategies, how to make him value you, why men lose interest, and other advice disguised as truths. At first, she watched out of curiosity. She even laughed at some ideas that seemed ridiculous. But seeing thousands of likes on comments like, "This worked for me," or "I did it and he was putty in my hands," made her wonder if she was doing something wrong in her own relationship. Even though she loved Oliver, she began questioning whether she was too predictable. She started noticing things she hadn't before. For example, he no longer texted her during work hours like he used to. Romantic dinners became less frequent. She began interpreting this as a sign that she was no longer a priority. A thought she'd never had before started haunting her: what if he stopped admiring her because she was too available? It didn't make logical sense, but it sounded convincing with so many experts claiming the secret was emotional scarcity. Emily, who had always been open and honest in her relationships, started seeing her openness as a mistake. The change was subtle at first. When Oliver tried to talk about his day, she gave shorter answers. She stopped sending spontaneous affectionate messages, testing whether he'd notice. When he hugged her, she'd pretend to be busy or tired. For a few days, it seemed to work. He started asking if everything was okay, showed some concern, even made her coffee one Sunday morning. Emily saw this as proof that tactics were working. She got a kind of reinforcement that, instead of warning her about the danger of the path she was on, pushed her to go further. She began controlling when she replied to his messages, avoiding eye contact during deeper conversations, and limiting affection to strategic moments. She thought she was being smart, taking control of the dynamic. Inside, she told herself it was temporary, that it would make him appreciate what they had more. Deep down, she still loved him deeply, but she started treating that love like a tool. She began measuring, rationing, weighing every action. Everything became calculated. Every move had an intention behind it. And without realizing it, she turned what was once light and spontaneous into a silent kind of performance. The problem was that Oliver didn't react the way the videos predicted. Instead of becoming more passionate, more attentive, more persistent, he simply respected her new behavior. If she pulled away, he gave her space. If she rejected affection, he didn't push. When she started cold conversations, he stayed polite but didn't force intimacy. This confused Emily. She expected resistance, expected him to pull her back, like the influencers promised. But all she got was calm, distant behavior, like someone accepting that the connection had changed. She started thinking he was detaching. She considered increasing the coldness even more to see if he'd react. She began canceling plans last minute, acting bored when they were together, going out with friends and posting photos suggesting freedom. She wanted to provoke a reaction. Any reaction. Jealousy, discomfort, anything to prove passion was still there. But he'd just say, "Okay," and go back to his routine. What Emily saw as disinterest was actually a response to the new pattern she'd created. And the more she played these games, the more Oliver withdrew. For an entire week, he didn't bring up their relationship. He didn't ask why she'd changed. He just treated her with polite kindness, like they shared a roof but not the same feelings anymore. Emily started feeling uncomfortable. She felt ignored, invisible. She couldn't admit she'd caused this shift. She'd go to bed angry, feeling like he was winning some imaginary game. But what she didn't understand was that there was no game. He was just adapting. And in that quiet process, he was starting to emotionally detach from what had once been the center of his life. One Wednesday, she left a prepared meal in the fridge, like she used to do in the early days of their relationship, hoping he'd see it as a gesture of reconciliation. When she got home, she saw he'd eaten something else and thanked her politely, without even mentioning the meal she'd left. That hurt more than any argument. Emily realized that in trying to teach him how to value her, she'd done the opposite. She'd taught him how to live without her. And in that moment, for the first time, she truly feared losing him. But instead of stepping back, she held tighter to the idea that she needed to stay firm in her strategy, maybe because she'd given in too soon. The video said the turning point would come when he felt the emptiness of her absence. But in that apartment, the emptiness was growing for both of them. The difference was that Emily still hoped for a turnaround. Oliver, quietly, was beginning to accept the end. It was supposed to be just another exhausting Monday. Emily had faced a series of tense meetings at work, tight deadlines, and demands coming from every direction. When she left the office, all she wanted was to go home, take a shower, lay her head in Oliver's lap, and feel like the world could stop for a few moments. On her way back, she remembered the first months in the apartment, when he'd make tea without being asked, when he'd listen to her entire venting before giving his opinion. She missed that, though she still hesitated to admit it. She thought that after so many weeks testing her limits, maybe this was the moment to signal she wanted to reconnect. She arrived home full of hope, as if something inside her was finally ready to give in. As soon as she walked in, she found Oliver getting out of the shower, getting ready. He was preparing to go out with some friends he hadn't seen in a long time. She, who'd hoped for an invitation to dinner or at least a "how was your day," found herself facing an invisible wall. She said she'd had a terrible day, hoping that would be enough for him to cancel and stay with her. He just replied with shallow empathy, something like, "That sucks, hope tomorrow's better," while putting his wallet in his pocket. Emily froze. That response, which might have seemed harmless in another context, now felt like a knife. It was as if he'd made it clear her exhaustion was no longer his responsibility. She stared at him, waiting for him to get it. He, on the other hand, avoided extending the conversation, like someone who already understood there was no safe space between them. When he finally asked if she minded him going out, she answered with a sharp, "Do whatever you want." The words came out mixed with hurt and pride, but the effect wasn't what she'd hoped. Oliver didn't beg to stay. He didn't try to figure out what she really meant. He just said, "Okay," and left. When the door closed, silence filled the room with a weight she couldn't bear. Emily sat on the couch and broke down. She cried without knowing exactly what hurt more, his absence, missing the version of him that used to exist, or the guilt for helping turn their relationship into something so different from what it once was. For the first time, she felt exhausted from keeping up appearances. She still loved him. The problem was she'd spent too long trying to hide it. She stayed there for nearly an hour, unsure what to do with the mix of frustration, regret, and fear. She thought about calling, asking him to come back, saying she needed to talk, but something inside told her he wouldn't answer. Not out of anger. Out of weariness. Out of being tired of guessing intentions. When he came back hours later, she pretended to be asleep in the bedroom. She hoped he'd come lie with her. Hoped he'd lie down quietly, like before, just to show some intimacy still existed. But he grabbed a pillow and went straight to the couch. She heard his steps and the sound of the cushion shifting. She wanted to get up, but pride held her back. In the morning, she woke up to find a note on the kitchen table, "I'll be back later today, have an important delivery." The kind of note that once warmed her heart now felt cold. Neutral. Technical. It was as if he'd become a polite roommate. Over that week, she tried to bring back small affectionate gestures. She asked how his day went, offered coffee, sent funny stickers on his phone. His replies were always polite, but impersonal. He'd thank her, smile slightly, but wouldn't go further. His eyes no longer had that old spark. It was like he'd closed a door inside and thrown the key away. Emily started realizing it wasn't enough to just go back to being herself. She'd crossed an invisible line. He'd learned to live in a relationship where love wasn't welcome. And now, even if she wanted to fix what she'd broken, it was like trying to erase dried ink with water. One night, she gathered the courage to confront him. She said she missed him, that things were different. He listened in silence, with tired eyes. He said he tried to understand, tried to adapt, tried to find reasons for her changes. At first, he thought it was just a phase. But over time, he started believing she didn't want this anymore. That she was pushing everything away. That she'd turned affection into punishment. Emily tried to explain, said she'd been insecure, thought she needed to reignite his interest. And then, he said the words she'd never forget, "I didn't pull away because I stopped loving you. I stepped back out of respect." That sentence broke something inside her. Because it was true. He hadn't given up. He'd just responded to what she gave him. And now, no matter how hard she tried, it was too late. She'd taught him that kindness was uncomfortable, that presence was excessive, that affection was something to be managed. And he'd learned. Learned to survive with less. Learned to protect himself from the disappointment of wanting and being rejected. She'd destroyed, brick by brick, the space where he once felt safe. And even now, seeing everything in ruins, part of her still hoped he'd say, "Let's try again." But he just stood up, took the blanket, and went back to the couch. From that moment on, Emily knew she'd lost something precious. And the worst part was it wasn't because of betrayal, lies, or violence. She lost it by underestimating the value of emotional honesty. By trying to turn real love into a control game. By thinking the other person only values what they're afraid to lose. And so, without yelling or slammed doors, the relationship that once felt like shelter turned into distance. A cold, quiet, irreversible distance. There were weeks of formal coexistence, sharing the same space with a silence that didn't need noise to be deafening. Emily lived in a state of waiting. She waited for a gesture showing he was still willing. Waited for a phrase, a shift in tone, anything that could open a crack to rebuild. But the days repeated themselves with cruel precision. Oliver followed his routine with mechanical kindness. He was polite, but not intimate. Courteous, but no longer present. The space between them grew without a sound. And even in the face of that widening gap, she still clung to the idea that there was time. That with patience, things would return. That maybe he just needed to see effort. Emily started cooking his favorite recipes again, leaving his towel folded on the bed, asking more carefully about his work projects. She tried to recreate the details from when love felt natural. But now, everything seemed forced. A one-woman play where she performed alone. Oliver would thank her, but his eyes stayed empty. He'd reply politely, but without warmth. He started working later, signed up for an online course, accepted invitations he used to turn down. Slowly, he built a new life where she was no longer central. And Emily saw it. Saw it and blamed herself. The final attempt came one night when she prepared dinner, lit candles, and set the table. Just like in the good old days. When he arrived, he looked surprised but sat down. They ate in silence for a few minutes until she said, voice trembling, that she missed him. Not his physical presence, but the man she used to share dreams, plans, and simple laughs with. He put his utensils down, took a deep breath, and stared at his plate for a moment. He said he also missed who he was with her. And he was sorry, because he'd tried with everything he had to preserve it. But there came a point when giving up wasn't cowardice, it was survival. She tried to argue, brought up everything that could still be rebuilt. said she understood her mistakes, regretted them, needed a second chance. He listened to it all. Calmly. In silence. And in the end, with a steady voice, he said he no longer felt emotional safety between them. That there was no solid ground left to build on. That anything they tried from here on would be built on rubble. And he didn't want that, for her or for himself. It was as if the passionate man who once asked permission to change the subject had learned to be firm. Not out of revenge. Out of self-respect. The next morning, Oliver started packing some clothes. He said he'd stay at his brother's for a while until he figured out the next step. Emily watched in silence, eyes filling with tears, feeling every small movement like a warning of the end. He left a note on the table. Short. Direct. Thanking her for the good years and wishing her peace. When he closed the door, she felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. For the first time in months, the apartment was completely empty. And the scariest part was realizing it wasn't just his absence, it was the absence of everything they'd built together. The days that followed were hard. Emily tried to keep going, but everything around her felt heavy with memories. His toothbrush still in the bathroom. The playlist he used to play while doing dishes. The spare key forgotten in the drawer. Every small trace of him now reminded her of how much she'd undervalued what she had. One afternoon, a mutual friend, Chloe, texted saying she'd seen Oliver at a cafe with a woman named Mia, his co-worker. They said they looked good, laughed a lot, and that he seemed lighter. It hit her in a way she didn't expect. It wasn't jealousy. It was the realization that he'd moved on. That someone saw him the way she once did, but without games, without strategies, without manipulation. Emily cried alone. For the loss, for the regret, for what could have been. For the naivety of thinking love needed to be tested. She realized she'd turned a healthy relationship into an emotional battlefield. All because of insecurity disguised as wisdom. All because she listened to strangers online more than to the heart of the man sleeping beside her. It devastated her. She spent days unable to get out of bed. She wrote letters she never sent, reread old conversations, listened to the voice messages he used to send in better times. It was like she was searching for proof that it had all been real. That the love she'd lived wasn't an illusion. And ironically, the more proof she found, the more painful it was to face what she'd destroyed. As weeks passed, she slowly started rebuilding her life. She returned to therapy. She stopped watching the videos she used to consume mindlessly. She reconnected with some old friends. She tried, little by little, to build something inside herself that didn't depend on anyone's approval. She eventually understood that the problem was never the depth of love she offered, but her fear of losing it. And that this fear, misdirected, made her try to control the uncontrollable. Loving should have been enough. She learned the hardest way that someone who loves doesn't need to manipulate, ration feelings, or hide behind strategies. She learned that trust, once broken, doesn't always find its way back. And that when someone gets tired of being pushed away, sometimes they learn to enjoy leaving. Looking back, there was no anger. Just regret. For the time lost. For the affection wasted. For a story that had every chance to last, but was sabotaged from within. Oliver was now just a memory of what once felt like home. And Mia, perhaps, living proof that when someone feels free to love, they bloom. Emily, alone in front of the mirror, faced the reflection of someone who once had everything, but was taught by strangers to act like she had nothing. And there, staring into her own eyes, she understood that her biggest mistake in life was playing games with the heart of someone who only ever wanted to stay. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.
Looking back at the entire situation, I have to say this clearly. The wife and her lover may have thought they were clever, but in my view, their actions are completely consumed by greed and moral decay. From my perspective, Betraying a partner's trust just to satisfy desire and financial ambition is a level of ethical collapse I simply cannot accept. What stands out most is the husband's response. He didn't choose public drama or violence. Instead, he used silence to gather evidence, patience to plan, and precision to deliver a final outcome where the truth exposed them completely. And the key lesson here is simple. Never underestimate the power of someone who is hurt but still calm. Lies can hide behind smiles for a while, but truth always finds its way to the surface. This story is a reminder that when a marriage foundation is already rotten, the only real solution is to tear it down and rebuild something stronger and more honest. What do you think about the wife's reaction when everything was exposed? And does the lover deserve the price he paid? Or was it inevitable?